All right, let's get right into it. It's easy to take our school system for granted the classrooms, the teachers, the stuff we learn. But have you ever stopped to ask where it all came from? Well, today, we're jumping back in time to the Victorian era, a period of massive change that basically built the schools we know today from the ground up.
To really get why schools needed a total overhaul, you first have to understand the world they came from. In the early 1800s, Britain wasn't one country. It was, as the future Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli so perfectly put it, two nations. This wasn't just about money. It was a giant chasm that decided everything about your life, especially whether you'd ever see the inside of a classroom. So, before the big reforms, education for most people, well, it was a total free-for-all. We're talking about a messy patchwork of charity schools and church classes, with absolutely no national standards, hardly any funding, and zero regulation. It was, in one word, chaos. And here's what's so wild. The very idea of childhood was completely different depending on which side of that chasm you were born on. While the rich kids were off studying Latin to get ready to run the empire, other kids, some as young as 5, were working these brutal, dangerous hours in factories. For them, school wasn't even on the radar. Survival was the only thing on the curriculum. Now, this is really fascinating. How on earth did they try to solve the problem of teaching hundreds of kids with just one teacher? The answer was something called the monitorial system. Basically, one schoolmaster teaches a lesson to a group of older students, the monitors, and then those monitors go and repeat the lesson to younger kids. It was literally a factory model for education, built for mass production on the cheap. But a broken system like that just couldn't last. The problems in industrial Britain were getting way too big to ignore. And slowly, a chorus of voices started to rise up, demanding that the government finally do something and create a real education system for everybody. And one of the most powerful and honestly most surprising of those voices belonged to a man you probably know better for his poetry, Matthew Arnold. Yeah, for 30 years, this guy wasn't just writing poems. He was out there, traveling the country, inspecting these awful underfunded schools. His official reports were absolutely scathing. He saw it all firsthand and argued that education had to be more than just learning to read and write. For him, it was a tool to help people grow, to build a common culture, and to create a better society for everyone. All that pressure from people like Arnold finally led to this, the moment everything changed. You can think of the 1870 Elementary Education Act as a legislative earthquake. It was the first time ever that the government took direct responsibility for making sure every single child had a school they could go to. So, how did it work? Well, the plan was brilliant in its simplicity. First, map out the whole country to find where schools were needed. Second, create local school boards with the power to actually do something. Third, give them the ability to raise money through taxes to build and run brand new schools. And finally, it set the stage for the totally radical idea that kids belonged in a classroom, not a factory. But the reformers knew something crucial. Buildings alone don't make a school. You can build 1,000 new schools, but they're useless without the right people teaching in them. So the Victorians realized they had to completely reinvent what it meant to be a teacher. And wow, this slide just shows you what a massive transformation they were aiming for. The old teacher was often seen as a joke. Maybe they were just a student monitor a few years earlier with no real training. The goal was to get rid of that image and create a new professional, someone trained, certified, and respected as a leader in the community. This new ideal teacher kind of had two sides. First up, you had the modern teacher. This was someone who treated teaching like a science. They were supposed to be an expert in pedagogy, which is just a fancy word for the science of how we teach. They needed to understand how kids' minds work and see education as a logical tool for making society better. But it wasn't just about being a brainiac. Just as important was the moral teacher. This ideal was all about character. The teacher was meant to be a moral compass for the community, a living example of patience and kindness. Their job was way bigger than just teaching facts. It was about shaping the moral character of the entire next generation. Okay, so the Victorians built this national school system and created a whole new profession to run it. But, and this is a huge but, this big project was never, ever meant to make everyone equal. Instead, it was designed to lock in the social order, especially when it came to boys and girls. This brings us to a really critical question. What did these new schools actually teach?
And was the knowledge they gave to girls the same as what they gave to boys? The answer, in short, not even close. The curriculum was literally split right down the middle. For boys, it was all about getting them ready for the public world, to be workers, citizens, maybe even leaders. They got logic, science, and math. For girls, education was about preparing them for the private world, the home. Their lessons were focused on things like obedience, domestic chores, and how to be a proper wife and mother. You know, the amazing feminist thinker Mary Wollstonecraft had called this out almost 100 years earlier. She argued that this kind of education wasn't about empowering women at all. It was about trapping them. It taught them that their only power was their beauty, and it turned their minds away from learning and towards simply decorating their own guilt cage. So where does all this leave us? What is the legacy of this incredible, contradictory, and revolutionary time? Why does the ghost of the Victorian classroom still kind of haunt our schools today? Well, because the Victorians didn't just build a few schools. They basically invented the whole idea of the modern school. State funding, professional teachers, a standardized curriculum, all the things we think of as normal, that was all them. These were Victorian inventions that we are still living with every single day. And that leaves us with one last, really big thought. The Victorians literally drew the blueprints for what a good school and a good teacher should be. So the question for us today is this: how much of that 19th century blueprint are we still using? And maybe more importantly, which parts of their design is it finally time to tear down and rebuild?